Wyoming Territory, October 1883, the wind whipped cold dust along the edge of the Laramie Plains as Fletcher Knox stepped down from his buckskin mare, boots crunching dry earth. He had not meant to stop. He was just heading south from Casper with a sack of flour, a new rope, and a quiet longing he never spoke on. But the sight of a woman alone, crying on the courthouse steps with a crumpled paper in her hand, froze him in place. She did not look up when he approached. Her shoulders shook beneath a worn blue shawl, and her skirt was dusted with dirt like she had fallen and not bothered to brush it off. Fletcher cleared his throat. "Ma'am," her head jerked up, eyes red-rimmed and wide, like she had not expected anyone to speak. She was young, early 20s maybe, and the pale braid over her shoulder was frayed at the ends. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Fletcher took off his hat. "You all right?" She blinked like she could not quite believe he was real. Then she looked back down at the papers in her lap and said, "They took it. My family's land. It was auctioned this morning. I was late getting here." Fletcher glanced at the folded sheets. The top one bore the county seal, the words "property transfer" stamped in black ink. "I begged the clerk," she said, voice cracking, "but the payment deadline passed. I was only short by $20. She laughed once, bitter. $20. Fletcher crouched beside her. "What is your name?" She looked at him like the question startled her. "Willa," she said softly. "Willa Vance." "Fletcher Knox," he returned. "What land are we talking about, Willa?" She hesitated, then unfolded the papers with shaking fingers. 80 acres east of town. It was my father's. He died last spring. I have been trying to keep up the payments, but the cattle took sick, and my oldest fell off the hay cart 2 weeks ago and broke his arm. I had to pay the doctor." Fletcher's chest tightened. "Your oldest?" Willa nodded. "Ephraim, he is 7. My youngest, Elsie, is 5. Their father left when Elsie was a baby." He stared at her for a long beat, taking in the exhaustion on her face, the way her hands clutched the papers like they were the last thing tethering her to solid ground. "You have the deed number?" he asked. She blinked. "Yes, but it is too late." "The land already sold." "Not if I get there first," he said, standing. Willa stood too, frowning. "Why would you?" "I just need the number." She hesitated, then pointed to the corner of the paper. Fletcher read it, memorized it, then turned and strode back toward his horse. "Why would you help me?" she called after him. He looked back once. "Because no woman should cry alone over something that can be fixed." The auction office was 3 blocks away. Fletcher moved fast. When he stepped inside, the clerk looked up from his ledger. "I want to pay off deed number 427, Fletcher said. The clerk squinted. "That one already. I do not care. If no money's changed hands, I will cover the full amount plus penalty right now." The clerk's gaze sharpened. "You got it on you." Fletcher pulled out his coin pouch. "Count it." Minutes later, he was back on the courthouse steps. Willa was still there, holding her children now. Ephraim stood stiffly, his arm in a sling. Elsie clung to her mother's skirt, eyes wide. Fletcher held out the receipt. "It is done. The land is yours again." Willa stared at the paper like it might vanish. "You paid it." "I did." Her lip trembled. "But I cannot repay you. I do not have. I did not ask for repayment." She took a step back, her hand tightening on Ephraim's shoulder. "Then why?" Fletcher looked down at the girl hiding behind her skirts, then back at Willa. "Because that land belongs to you, and because I have lived a long time knowing what it is to lose everything and no one step in. I do not want to walk away knowing I could have done something and chose not to." Willa's eyes filled again, but this time she did not look away. "I do not know what to say. Just let me ride out with you, make sure everything is in order." She hesitated, then nodded. They rode out together that evening. The sun dipped low, turning the plains gold and long-shadowed. Ephraim rode with his mother on a borrowed gelding, and Fletcher lifted Elsie up to ride in front of him. She giggled softly when the wind tugged at her bonnet. When they reached the homestead, the house stood crooked but standing. A few chickens scratched at the dirt. A red calf bawled from the small corral. "It is not much," Willa said, dismounting, "but it is all we had." Fletcher looked around. "It is good land. It just needs hands." She turned to him. "You said you were passing through." "I was." He paused, then added, "But I do not have to be." Her breath caught. "You would stay if you want me to." Willa looked at her children, then at the house, then back at this quiet, steady man who had done what no one else had stood up for her without asking anything in return. "I would like that," she said. Fletcher smiled, the kind that started small and stayed. "Then I will stay." The morning after they arrived back at the homestead, the first frost clung white to the grass behind the barn. Fletcher had risen early, not out of habit so much as a restless need to move. He stood at the edge of the pasture, arms crossed, watching his breath drift in the cold. A hawk circled over the far ridge, casting a slow shadow across the field. Willa came out with a bucket and a quiet nod. She didn't speak until she'd reached the pump beside him. "I can haul water," Fletcher said, reaching for the bucket. "I know," she answered, but let him take it anyway. They worked side by side in silence, the kind that didn't press. Fletcher poured water into the trough while Willa checked the calf's leg. It limped but bore weight now. She didn't mention it aloud. Afterward, she brushed her hands on her skirt. "The roof leaks in the back room. If it rains again, the mattress'll soak through." "I'll patch it," Fletcher said. She glanced at him, then away. "You don't owe me any more help." "I know," he said. He split wood after breakfast while Ephraim sat in the dirt near the tree line, carving a stick with a dull-edged knife. Elsie played beside the porch, talking to a headless corn husk doll. Willa moved between tasks, sweeping out the root cellar, pulling up the last of the potatoes, checking the smokehouse for mold, never lingering too long in one place. By early afternoon, Fletcher climbed down from the roof, wiping resin from his palms with a scrap of canvas. Willa stood below, arms crossed, studying the new shingles. "Looks solid," she said. "It should hold," he replied. She tilted her head. "You learn roofing from your father?" "No," he said, stepping down. "From an old ranch foreman in Montana. He could mend a roof in a blizzard with nothing but fence wire and a prayer." She smiled faintly, then nodded toward the barn. "There's a stall full of harnesses needing oil." "I've been meaning to get to it." "I can see to that," Fletcher offered. Willa hesitated. "If you're going to stay, you should know. There's a man in town, Henry Vaughn. He wanted the land, bid on it. He'll come around sooner or later asking questions." Fletcher's jaw set. "He show up here before, once, right after Papa passed, said he'd take the place off my hands. I told him no. And he didn't press it. He waited until the taxes came due. Then he watched." Her voice cooled. "Folks like him don't need to shout to get what they want." Fletcher nodded once. "If he comes, I'll be here." She looked at him then, really looked, like she was weighing something behind her eyes. "You always this quick to put yourself between people in trouble?" "No," he said, "but I've spent years riding past folks in worse shape than me." "I've had enough of that." They stood in the yard, wind tugging at Willa's braid, Fletcher's hat tipped low against the sun. Ephraim hadn't looked up once, still dragging the knife along the wood. Elsie had fallen asleep on the porch steps, arms wrapped around her doll's limp body. Willa rubbed her hands together. "You hungry?" He nodded. "I could eat." Inside, the house was plain but cared for. The fire snapped in the hearth, and she set a pot of beans to heat while Fletcher brought in a bucket of water. He rinsed his hands at the basin, then stepped back as Willa moved past him with a loaf of cornbread wrapped in a cloth. "I didn't expect company," she said, not apologizing, just stating fact. "I didn't expect to stay," he replied. They sat across from each other at the table. The chairs creaked and the beans were a little too salty, but neither of them mentioned it. Halfway through, Willa glanced up. "Do you have family?" He shook his head. "Had a brother. He died in a mining collapse down in Colorado. I was in Dakota Territory when the letter caught up to me." She stirred her spoon through the broth. "I'm sorry." "So was I," he said. Her eyes lingered on him a moment longer, then dropped back to her bowl. Later, when the light faded to blue outside and the children were asleep, Willa stood at the door, arms around herself. "You can take the cot by the stove," she said. "It's not soft, but it's dry." Fletcher nodded. "I appreciate it." She didn't move from the doorway. He waited. "I'm not used to someone staying," she said, voice low. "You don't have to be," he answered. "Not all at once." She nodded, then turned and went down the hall. He lay awake long after the fire settled to embers, listening to the wind drag across the eaves and the soft creak of floorboards as the house settled into silence. The first snow settled light as ash 3 mornings later. Fletcher opened the barn doors before dawn, the hinges groaning under the cold, and found the red calf curled in the straw, steam rising off its back. He moved slow, careful not to startle it, and laid down fresh hay while his breath fogged the air around him. Willa had taken to rising before the children, her footsteps quiet on the laddered floorboards overhead. She didn't speak much that morning, only nodded once when she passed him on the way to the chicken pens, a sack of crushed corn under one arm. Her shawl had a new tear along the hem, but she didn't seem to notice it. After breakfast, Ephraim sat at the table with a slate, tongue caught between his teeth as he copied out letters. Willa pointed to a crooked R and said, "Try again, but slower." Fletcher watched from the doorway, arms crossed. "You teacher trained?" he asked. "No," she said, not looking up. "But Ma taught me my letters before I could reach the table, and I promised her I'd pass that on." He shifted his weight, thumb hooked through his belt loop. "You ever think about asking the schoolhouse in town for books?" She straightened. "They won't lend to us. Last spring, the teacher said we were too far out, said Ephraim could come in if I boarded him with someone closer, but I won't send him off." Fletcher nodded once. "I'll talk to someone." "You don't have to," she began, but he was already pulling on his coat. The sun hadn't broken through the cloud cover when he hitched his mare and made the ride toward town. He didn't stop at the mercantile or the smithy. He went straight to the schoolhouse. The teacher, a wiry man with a knotted necktie and ink-stained fingers, looked up from sorting slates. "I'm here about the Vance children," Fletcher said. The man shrugged. "They're beyond the district's reach." "You're telling me books can't cross a fence line?" The teacher's eyes narrowed. "It's not policy." Fletcher leaned in slightly, voice low. "Policy doesn't feed minds." "I'm not asking you to ride out. Just lend a few readers and chalk. I'll bring them back whole." The teacher studied him a long moment, then turned and pulled a stack of primers from the shelf. "If they don't come back clean, I'll be billing you directly." Fletcher nodded once. "Fair enough." By the time he returned, the clouds had thickened and the wind pushed dry snow across the ruts in the road. He dismounted and handed the books to Willa without a word. She took them gently, her eyes scanning the covers. "He gave them to you?" "Loaned," Fletcher said. "He'll want them back, but not for a while." She ran her fingers along the spine of the top volume. "I didn't ask you to do this." "You shouldn't have to," he said. That evening, Ephraim sat cross-legged by the fire, muttering syllables under his breath while Willa mended the hem of Elsie's dress. Fletcher carved a notch into a length of pine to replace a broken latch on the barn door. "Did you always work cattle?" Willa asked, not looking up. "No," Fletcher said. "Started out driving freight between Cheyenne and Fort Laramie, got tired of sleeping on cargo and eating Weeviled oats. Took to range work after that." She tied off her thread, then met his eyes. "What made you ride this way?" "Too many towns that felt like they didn't want anything but my wages," he said. "I figured I'd keep riding till something felt worth staying for." She turned the dress in her lap, smoothing the fabric. "And this?" He didn't answer right away. Then, quiet, "This feels like a place a man could set himself right." She folded the dress carefully and set it aside. "I don't know what right is anymore. Most days I'm just trying to keep ahead of what needs fixing." "Maybe that's all right is," he said. "Trying every day." She didn't reply, but her shoulders eased slightly, like something she'd been holding too tight had loosened. Outside, the wind rose, hissing through the cracks in the shutters, and inside, the fire held steady. Fletcher stood and added another log, then turned toward the doorway. "I'll check the barn. That latch won't hold the wind." Willa looked up. "Wait," he paused. Her eyes were steady now, no trace of the desperation he'd first seen in them. "You can take the back room," she said. "I moved the mattress in there. It's better than the cot." Fletcher nodded. "All right." She hesitated, then added, "I don't expect anything." "I know," he said. She stepped aside and let him pass, her hand brushing his sleeve just once. Not by accident and not by mistake, just long enough to say something neither of them had yet found the words for. The wind had settled by morning, but the cold held firm. Fletcher walked the fence line with a hammer and a satchel of bent nails, pressing his boot against loose posts, testing each one like it told him something. The snow had crusted overnight and his breath came in short bursts, but he moved steady, eyes low. mind turning over the weight of what staying really meant. Willa was in the smokehouse when he returned, her sleeves rolled, hair pinned back haphazardly. Fletcher leaned in the doorway and watched her inspect the last of the dried venison, her fingers quick and sure. "You've done more with less than most folks do with plenty," he said. She didn't look up. "That's not a comfort." It wasn't meant to be. She hung a slab from a hook and turned to face him. Her cheeks were flushed from the chill, but her eyes were sharp. "I'm not waiting for someone to fix things," she said. "I know," he answered. Willa studied him a moment. "Then why do you keep stepping in like you are?" Fletcher reached into his coat, pulled out a folded letter. "Because someone once did that for me. I didn't understand it then, thought it made me weak to need someone else, but he didn't ask anything of me. Just said I'd know when it was my turn to do the same." She took the paper, glanced at the name signed in faded ink at the bottom. "He family? No, just a man with a good back and a quiet way of seeing people." She handed the letter back. "You still carry it. It reminds me to stay the kind of man I meant to become." Willa stepped past him into the daylight. "I don't know what kind of woman I meant to become. I only know I've had to be more than one." Fletcher followed her into the yard. "Maybe you don't have to choose. Maybe you're already enough." She stopped at the porch, one hand on the railing. "You speak like someone who's lived more years than he lets on." "Maybe I have." Later, while Fletcher hauled a broken wheelbarrow into the barn, Ephraim followed, dragging a length of rope behind him. "Ma says you know horses," the boy said, watching Fletcher lift the barrow onto blocks. "I know enough to keep from being thrown," Fletcher replied. "I want to learn to ride proper, not just on the plow mule." Fletcher set the wheelbarrow down and straightened. "You got a good seat already." "I seen it. Next time I ride fence, you come with me. We'll take it slow." Ephraim's face lit up, then turned serious. "Ma says I got to keep up with my letters first." "She's right," Fletcher said. "A man should know how to read a trail and a ledger." The boy nodded, then trotted off, rope trailing behind him. That evening, Willa sat at the hearth, her fingers idly tracing the edge of a piece of muslin. Fletcher sat nearby, sharpening a blade against his whetstone in slow, steady strokes. The light from the fire played soft across the floorboards, and the house was quiet except for the creak of settling wood and the low hum of wind beneath the eaves. "Do you miss it?" she asked suddenly. He looked up. "What? Riding, moving on." "Not being tied to one place." Fletcher set the knife down. "I used to think I'd forget how to stay if I ever stopped long enough. Now I think I was just afraid of being still." Willa leaned her head against the hearth stones. "Stillness can be hard. It asks things of you." "Like what?" "Like patience and hope, and the strength to watch something grow slow and crooked and still love it." Fletcher didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "I'm finding I'd rather build something crooked than leave something empty." She turned to face him fully now, her knees drawn up, the muslin bunched in her lap. "I don't know if I can promise anything yet," she said. "There's still too much in me that's wary." "I'm not asking for a promise," he said. "Just a place at the table, a place to be useful." Willa's voice dropped to a whisper. "You already are." He nodded once, slow. She stood then, walked past him to the back room. A moment later she returned with a folded blanket and set it beside him. "You don't have to sleep by the fire tonight," she said. "The mattress is warmer and I trust you." Fletcher looked up at her, eyes steady. "I won't take more than you give, I know," she said. "That's why I'm not afraid of giving it." She turned away, her footsteps soft over the floorboards. Fletcher didn't move at first. He just watched the fire flicker low and let the warmth in the room settle deeper than the cold ever could. The last thaw came with a hush, as if the land itself was holding its breath before the shift of seasons. Snow melted into the ruts along the wagon path, and the creek behind the pasture began to run again, slow but sure. Fletcher found himself waking with the sun, not from restlessness but readiness. Willa had taken to leaving the kitchen window open in the early light, letting in the sharp scent of damp earth. Fletcher noticed, without comment, how she'd begun humming low as she kneaded dough or stirred the pot at dusk. She'd always carried herself with purpose, but now something gentler moved beneath it, like warmth in the grain of old wood. One morning, she stepped out of the house with a worn blue scarf tied around her hair and a tin of lye soap in her hand. "I want to get the laundry done before the wind picks up," she said. Fletcher looked up from where he was sanding the new porch rail. "I'll carry the water." She nodded and handed him the tin by the creek. She knelt beside the flat, worn stone where her mother had once done the same work. Fletcher filled the basin, careful not to splash her skirt. "You ever think about building a wash house?" he asked. "I have," she said, wringing water from a shirt, "but I never had the time or the boards." "I'll start on one next week," he said. "Could put it behind the barn." She glanced over her shoulder. "You always just decide things like that," he crouched beside her. "Only when they make sense." She didn't answer, just dunked the next blouse into the cold water. A moment passed before she said, "I've been thinking of writing to my mother's cousin in Kansas. She's got girls near Ephraim's age. Might send a letter with the next freight wagon." Fletcher turned a smooth stone over in his hand. "You thinking of going there?" "No," she said. It might be good to let someone know we're all right, that we're not just surviving anymore." He nodded. "That'd ease her heart, I imagine." Willa paused with her hands in the sudsy water. "Would it ease yours, having someone write back for you?" "I don't have anyone left to write," he said. She looked at him then, and he held her gaze. "That's not true anymore," she said softly. The next week passed in steady rhythm. Fletcher built the washhouse frame with Ephraim's help, the boy careful with nails and eager to learn the names of each tool. Willa planted early lettuces in the kitchen garden and showed Elsie how to chase crows off with a strip of tin tied to a stick. One afternoon, as Fletcher planed the last crossbeam, he spotted a rider slowing near the gate. The man wore a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat, and his chestnut mare stepped high, her reins held loose. Willa came out of the house before Fletcher could call for her. "Henry Vaughn," she said, her voice flat. Fletcher stepped down from the sawhorse. "You've had your say once before." Vaughn dismounted, brushing dust from his coat. "I heard the land didn't sell after all, that a stranger paid off the note." "That's right," Fletcher said. Vaughn looked past him to Willa. "You always find someone to fix things for you?" "I found someone who doesn't expect anything in return," she said. Vaughn's jaw twitched. "You've made a hard bargain, Miss Vance. You'll regret it come next winter. I've lived through worse," she said. Vaughn turned without another word, mounted up, and rode off, dust trailing behind him. Fletcher didn't speak until the sound of hooves faded. "You all right?" he asked. Willa nodded. "He won't come back." Fletcher watched her for a long moment. "You were firm with him?" "I had to be," she said. "I've learned not to wait for someone else to speak for me." That night, after the children were in bed, Willa stepped out onto the porch. Fletcher was sitting on the steps, boot heels planted in the dirt, arms resting on his knees. "I've been thinking," she said, settling beside him. "We've built something, haven't we?" He looked at her, the firelight from the hearth flickering through the open door behind them. "We have," he said, "and it's not just fence lines and roof beams," she added. "It's steadiness. It's knowing someone will be there when the morning comes." Fletcher reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "I don't want you sleeping in the back room anymore," she said. "I want you in our home, with me. Not because you fix things, but because you've made room for something I didn't think I could have again." He turned to her fully. "Willa, I came here thinking I'd pass through in a day, but I found something that made me stop." "I found you." She leaned into him then, slow and sure, her head resting on his shoulder. "We'll make a life here, together." "Yes," he said, his voice thick. "Together." They sat there long after the fire inside dimmed, wrapped in the hush of the land around them, the sound of wind through the cottonwoods like a song with no end. Years later, the wash house stood firm behind the barn, now framed with honeysuckle vines. The fence lines held and the garden grew in tidy rows. Ephraim learned to break colts with a soft hand, and Elsie took to baking, her biscuits the pride of Sunday church suppers. Fletcher taught both children how to read the land, and Willa taught them how to listen. In the evenings, Willa and Fletcher sat on that same porch, their hands still finding each other without needing to search. Everything they'd built had come one piece at a time, quiet, steady, lasting, and it was enough. It was more than enough. They lived the rest of their days on that land, beside the creek and the cottonwoods, in a home full of warmth and laughter, where love was never loud but always certain.